Are live. We are live. Ooh. Right. Hello. Right. We are live as far as I can tell. We are live. There's my hand. Hey. And there's my hand not. Hello. Welcome to the Shot at an Angle show. This is my diary. I like this diary. Just picked it up. Kind of encapsulates what I think most of the time. I always start with a glass of water, right? This is the Shot at an Angle show, which I do live here on Facebook at 5 o'clock every week. Got to make sure all my consonants are pronounced correctly. 5 o'clock here on Facebook on the Shot at an Angle page, and at 6 o'clock, which is just under an hour, on Instagram. Now this is about to change. I'm going to change this for the future, and I think we're just going to be ending up live here on Facebook, and I'm looking to stream both here and YouTube at the same time. That's my goal. I've got a plan in place, so that will start potentially from next week, but keep an eye out over the week or next week or so for an announcement about that, both on Facebook and also on Instagram. I still will do some Instagram lives, but they might not be on a weekly basis. Anyway, what is the Shot at an Angle show? Every week here on my Facebook page, I talk about a specific subject, and that's around creativity, confidence, just something interesting when it comes to your creativity. And this week's specific topic is going to be, well, it came to me from a viewer of the show, funny enough, on Instagram, and they asked a question, and it's something I really want to like. This is an interesting question to explore, and I've already got quite a few thoughts about this. Is how photographs capture emotions in people. So when you look at a photograph of a person or people, there is an emotional response to that photo. Quite often, this is quite an interesting and deep subject for me as a photographer, especially, that I've always found that when it comes to photography of people, I mean, you can kind of fall into two categories. One is, like any photograph, you pretty much take your camera, take the shot, and there's not much thought about the process. It's just a matter of just taking a photograph, maybe capturing the moment. You've seen something, and you want to capture it. That's not necessarily. That's just a spur of the moment photograph. You've just taken it. But the other type of photography is where you're planning beforehand. You know what you want to take, and you know what you're going after, what shot you like. You put a lot of thought into it. You've got experience in that type of photography as well. But people photography in particular is quite a challenging thing. Portrait photographers and good portrait photographers have a particular skill based upon years of experience. When it comes to capturing emotion, now photography itself is very much a very thin slice of time. When you take a photograph, it's very instant. There was actually a series of photographs taken in a study where they were taken just before they sneezed, so the facial expression before somebody sneezed, and it was it was asked, what do you think the people are thinking of? What was their emotion at the time? And of course, it varies by reaction, but of course the actual person, that was having the photograph taken wasn't anywhere near that. Wasn't anywhere near. You weren't anywhere near what the actual person was feeling at the time, because it was very much taken out of context. Now, that's the thing with photography. Everything is kind of taken out of context. So you can quite easily portray emotion in photography. But a lot of it comes down, and this is the interesting thing about emotion in photography. And when you talk about emotion, you often will talk about the person, the subject. But really, the emotion comes from the person who's taking the photograph, because they're the one that's deciding. You're deciding as the photographer what emotion you want to portray at that moment. And if you were to take a series of shots of one person, you will already have some idea of what you would want to be doing, what you want from that photo. You say that, for example, that there's really obvious things like you wouldn't want them to have their eyes closed necessarily, or maybe you do, but they wouldn't necessarily want that. So that you're already selecting, as a photographer, you're already selecting what you want from a photograph. So capturing emotion in photography is definitely down to the decision of the photographer rather than the person you're photographing. The model would like to think that they have the final say of how they're portrayed. So that's the photographer side of things. But the viewer, it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? That you can see photographs of somebody who looks very thoughtful, who looks very pensive, or looks very sort of distant. But it's all interpretation. That the emotion of a photograph comes from the photographer, because that's the initial idea, but then it branches out into so many different feelings based upon the viewer, based upon the person who's looking at the image, that an emotion can be elicited from an image, from a photo, from one person, could have a very quite an emotional reaction, whatever that emotion is, and then somebody else would look at it and have no emotional reaction to it at all, and not be interested in it whatsoever. So it often comes down to, I think it comes down to both the photographer, what their original idea was, how well they execute that idea, and then beyond that, there is it's the viewer's interpretation of the photograph, that it's your own interpretation. It's like with any art, really. It all comes down to your own interpretation, your own biases, and what you particularly like and what you particularly don't like. It's an interesting subject of emotion in general. If you broaden this out to beyond photography, to any creative endeavor. So if I was to say that my favorite book of all time was 1984 by George Orwell, now some of you might say, well, that's a very dark book, and it is. There's a lot of very unhappy. It's a very unhappy story. And you may then come to the conclusion that I'm a very dark and very maybe quite pensive person, or very that you can draw conclusions about my own personality from that, or that somebody listens to a lot of pop music, that they're very kind of happy-go-lucky, But again, it's all down to your own perception of art and of emotion from that. The emotion is your own. You have, in a way, you have some control over your emotions, but sometimes quite often when you first see something, it's that initial reaction, isn't it? It's a very complex and sort of woolly subject in so many ways. There is no there's no hard and fast answer to whether how photographs capture emotion in people. How can that, when the reality you're showing is not necessarily the exact emotion of the time. So whenever I photograph people, whenever I've been which isn't my I would say isn't my strongest point as a photographer. I am in some ways quite a general photographer, but my strong point has always been in perspectives and lines and not people. But whenever I photograph anybody, I at least attempt to be an observer rather than tell my subject what to do. It's a different it comes at it from an alternate angle, comes from a different angle, really, because I feel that my own interpretation of how people would look, or how they should look and how they should be, I always want them. I always want the people that I photograph to feel, well, happy that they're in front of the camera in the first place, which is often a place of discomfort for a lot of people. I know many people that don't like to be photographed for many different reasons. Often it's just down to the fact of your own. You just don't think you look good in photographs. That itself is a form of a filter in some ways, because you're not having somebody in their natural state. And often I think with being in front of a camera, it's very difficult to be natural in front of a camera, especially when you know you're being photographed. In a way, the candid style photography is probably, for me at least, is the best way to capture a raw emotion in photos, in photography. That if you see, when somebody literally doesn't know they're being photographed, have no idea at that moment. And that's where so I know at least one photographer that's like this as well, and there's probably quite a few that don't do very many stage photographs because of that. But that is a way to capture proper emotion, that you're not controlling a scene. There is still a control there, of course, because if you're shooting a lot of shutter photographs, they're not all going to be necessarily to the standard that you enjoy, like as a photographer, as you would want. But at the same, you would be editing them down, so you're already editing out shots that you don't like for whatever reason. There are shots that don't always come off as you would like them to. But I'm thinking now, as you can probably tell. It's an interesting subject. I love talking. I love thinking about this type of thing. I love talking about it as well, and I love sharing the thought process. And hopefully it maybe sparks something in you. That there's something that it gives you ideas. That's the whole idea of this show in a lot of ways, is to talk about these sort of bigger subjects. I do a podcast as well, and a lot of the podcast at the moment is talking about a subject and having a particular subject and really diving into it and seeing where you end up. When I first saw this question, in fact, I had two questions given to me by the same person. The second question, which I will come back to at some point. I want to think about it a bit more before I actually really go with the other question. I wasn't necessarily going to go for this, but when I looked at it again, this is a really interesting subject. The whole idea of emotion in photography and capturing emotion in people. That my conclusion to this, in a way, is are we talking about emotion in reality, like real emotion versus perceived emotion? You know, how authentic do you want your photographs to be? You know, so you can. There's a great. I'm sure it's on YouTube. But there's a great video that you can find, and it's probably been on. I probably saw it on Facebook probably, but this is a great short video on a group of people, group of friends in a bar, in a pub, and they're all sat around the table looking bored and looking at their watch. So they're all on their phones, and then somebody says Facebook photo, and they're all like, yeah, having a good time. And then after the photo's taken, they all go back to looking bored again. So a photograph can express reality very plainly, because a photograph is what it is, and it's very digital. There is digital manipulation, but it's not the same as a portrait, a painted portrait, which is very much down to the artist's interpretation of the person, right? But photographs are very much an instant moment, and they might not fully portray the feelings and the emotions at the time. There's one of my favourite photographers. I wouldn't necessarily say an inspiration to me, because he's definitely a people photographer. It's by the name of Martin Parr. Now, you might have come across his name before, but I definitely recommend you go and have a look at his photographs. And he once said that there weren't enough photographs taken. The photos that we're taking now are too perfect. That we're looking for the perfect moment too much. I'm kind of paraphrasing him here. I know if he's watching this video, which is about as likely as me going to the moon, but if he is watching this video, I'm probably paraphrasing him a bit. But he was almost he was encouraging photographs to be taken at times when it wasn't just the happy moments in life, you know, the celebrations. It was also the more stressful times and the harder times in life that you don't necessarily want to see, that you want to hide away. That actually they all form part of our reality and they all form part of our life. And that's a very raw emotional art as well. The art can try to be. You can easily hide behind it. You can easily hide behind art and hide behind decisions you make when you take photos. There's a great one of his photos. One of my favourite photos of his is of two children, a boy and a girl, and they've both got ice creams, and I think it's one of them. I can't remember which one it is. Has lost their ice cream and is not happy about it, and it just captures so much about this moment in time of raw emotion. You know, I suppose to kind of recap about the whole subject of, because I'm really kind of exploring how photographs capture emotion in people. Sort of, if you want to, you really want to, is you need to be free with the person you're taking the photograph with, and be open to them, to their ideas, and be open to have an open relationship with the person you're photographing. And often, I mean, I like to say that to make sure, I like to make it really obvious that what I'm doing is the camera is just a mechanical device. It's just a device. It's just a tool that allows us to do something, like capture something. And we live in such an age now, and I'm not just talking about like the technology that we have. You know, here in 2020, we have such amazing array of technology. But cameras in general, you know, cameras have been around for over 100 years now. That they allow us to capture the world around us in in ways that were not possible in the past. You know, they're very based on reality. They can be very much based on reality. You're capturing something right now. You know, that I'll leave this thought with you. Well, last thought before I sign off. That when you're photographing anything, especially people, make sure in a way that you're remembering that you're not the subject, they are. Which sounds quite strange because you're the one behind the camera, but you're the one with the control. You're the one that's driving the car. You're the one that's steering the ship. You're the one that's flying the rocket. How many analogies can I come up with? You're the one that's boiling the kettle. No, that's a really weird one. And remember that. And remember that you are in control. And just allow that control to go the other side of the lens and allow yourself to become an observer rather than a controller. Allow yourself to, because then, and communicate with the person you're talking, you're photographing, regardless of what photograph you're taking here, whether you're in a big studio, if you ever get into a studio, or if you're just taking a photograph of a friend, you know, allow them to really dictate how they'd like to be captured, because it's them, not you. And that's how you can really get proper emotion into photography. There's a trust between the photographer and the subject, and then the camera becomes almost invisible. That it's just, at the end of the day, it is just a tool. That's all it is. It's just a tool, nothing more. It's a tool that allows us to do some amazing things and to capture amazing moments in life. I think that will do for now. That's nearly half an hour of me talking about this, and I will sign off here. This is going to be available later on YouTube. There is the YouTube channel, Shot at an Angle. If you go onto there, you can find the whole back catalogue of this show. I call it my iPlayer because that's not pretentious at all, right? So it's the iPlayer on YouTube. I will be posting links to the playlist and various videos of that in the coming weeks here on Facebook. I'm going to do a live show in about half an hour on Instagram at 6 o'clock, and tune in for that one because that's very likely to be the last Instagram live show of the Shot at an Angle show. I will be doing lives on Instagram, but I'm very much going to be concentrating here on Facebook. Now, next week it will be again here at 5 o'clock on Facebook. The Shot at an Angle show will be here live. But who knows? It could also be on other places at the same time. I'm looking at linking both Facebook and YouTube live. I want to do those two at the same time. So have a good week. And whilst I think about it, is there anything you'd like? Is there any, as I was talking today, did it resonate with you at all? Is there anything that was it interesting? Any questions you would like to ask me? Anything at all? Put it in the comments below. But also, equally, if there's something you'd like me to specifically talk about in a future show, let me know. This show is very much our show. I am the man in front of the camera. I'm the one that's sort of talking about the subject. But if you have a particular subject that you'd like me to talk about, or a particular idea, or it can be really make it as wide or as narrow as you particularly like to think. And I shall see you next week. Have a good week. And I'm gonna now disappear off the camera again because I've got to stop the live show.